Shebang. Right. Yeah, so what we're going to look at is eyes, but we're also going to be looking at bringing other sub-tools in to help us kind of sculpt. One thing we do not want to do is sculpt an eyeball into the head. Just because it's a real pain in that. I mean, you can, if it's what the end product is, you can blend, you can like Dynamesh the eyeball back into the face, back into the head. If you don't want floating eyeballs, but generally, you want to have your eyeballs completely separate from your head, because in real life, your eyes aren't fused to your eyelids. Your eyes are free floating and they kind of move around. As a practice, you might want to sculpt in an actual eyeball as if you're dealing with actual clay, for shits and giggles. But generally not. So I'm going to start off with my name, Ernest, with no eyes. Where's my pen? I've lost it again. Why do I always do this? I always do this. There it is. So we're going to start off with Ernest with no eyes. I'm going to bring these in, but first of all, I'll actually have a look at eyes. So eyes are really easy. How many eyes wide is the head generally? 5. So obviously, and I was saying before as well, a ping pong ball is a rough approximation of the eyeball of a standard human adult. Eyes don't generally grow as well. They grow a little bit, but it's why like toddlers and babies have really big eyes. It's because their eyes grow a lot slower than the rest of the body. And obviously their eyes are going to take up a lot of the head. It's why when you see a baby skull, it's like a round ball with 2 massive holes in it, because there's less space for everything else. So, the main thing we want to be looking at or thinking about is just the general anatomy of the eye. Obviously, we've got things like the eyelid, not the eyelid, sorry, the eyebrow, which is, what is the landmark of the eyebrow? Where does that sit?
On the skull.
On the skull, yeah, but what part of the skull?
The eye.
Yeah, the orbital socket, top of the orbital socket. Yeah, so basically from there, anything below that is starting to go into the eye socket. So underneath that, this bit here is basically going into the recess or the cavity just inside where your tear duct is. Again, if you look at different people, either different people generally or different ethnicities, you'll see this area here, right here for people watching on the recording, is quite varied. This is a really nice area here. Now, I can't remember what this is called, because the epicanthal fold is actually this bit, your actual eyelid. But this bit here is really nice because, again, from person to person, region to region, whatever, you'll have, some people have quite a fatty deposit right there, a subcutaneous fatty deposit. And some people have quite I've got quite a bony one here, even though I'm a big lad, I've got quite a bony one. But you'll see the shape is different from person to person. This will sometimes come down quite drastically. There you go. So this is almost like this. With this whole fat deposit, it almost like takes over, and you'll see the upper eyelid kind of be engulfed on the outside. This whole fleshy area here becomes dominant of the eyelid. And then you have these two, like the yellow areas here. I don't know how to explain it. It's essentially parts of the muscle structure underneath, because obviously underneath the eyelid you've got a big old muscle like that. You've got 2 muscles that split like this. But these bits here, they're just kind of like general kind of fleshy areas. These are 2 most important bits though, the upper eyelid and the lower eyelid. Now, when we come on to mouths on Thursday, we'll have the same issue where we have dominant and subdominant. Now with mouths, dominant and subdominant often switch depending if you've got like an overbite or an underbite. Your lower lip might engulf your upper lip, whatever. Your upper eyelid is always going to be dominant of your lower eyelid. In the corners here, on the outside there, you're always going to have your upper eyelid fold over your lower eyelid. So when it comes to actually refining, you don't have to get that straight away, but when it comes to refining the sculpt later on, I'm going to start off with that being basically equal and not looking quite right, but then I'll bring that forward. When I'm sculpting, I'll just get the shape in there first. And then your lower eyelid is on the bottom 1/5 of your eye. So again, like I was talking about last week, so we look at the eye from the side there. Upper eyelid, lower eyelid. Your lower eyelid is pretty much on the bottom 1/5 head. It's actually quite low. And when you blink, your lower eyelid doesn't actually move that much. It's your upper eyelid that does all the work. So these are the shapes I'm going to be thinking about. I should already have this shape in there from my general sculpting. I don't need any kind of like hair information, but I need that area in there. And then I'm going to be thinking about, often looking at my reference, is my person got quite a cavernous area in the inside of the tear ducts, or is it quite flat? Has my reference got quite a bony or quite a fatty, I'm going to find the word for this bit, that bit, the corner of the eye here. And generally, depending on my race, ethnicity and age, what's going on with my eyelids, I've got a good example just below this. So that's also, this is quite a soft version. Like if you go like a little bit OTT, you'll have something like this where, you know, if you think about it very graphically, this is the information we're looking at. You know, I might want to overdo this deposit at first. I can. Go in, push the door, get in. It's alright, just get the seat. So I might be overdoing this bit first, just to get it in there. And I'll bring back in the eyelids later on. I'll also be thinking about this while I'm defining my eyes. I'll be thinking about this area here. Now this is the bit I was talking about. You've got them little bags of fat, or subcutaneous fat, in your cheeks. If you feel just underneath your eyelid, be careful you don't poke yourself in the eye, but you can often feel that in the lower eyelid, it's actually quite rubbery and fleshy. You know, can drag and pull that out quite a lot. And if you poke around, you'll feel the top of your cheekbone around here, and you'll turn to more of like a rubbery, fattier flesh. So I'm also going to be thinking about this area here while I'm bringing in my eyes. So here's 3 nice examples of different structures of the eye. So you can see here where that upper epicanthal fold is actually very, very dominant. You know, you don't really see the upper eyelid until it comes to the outside of the, I think it's called the scleria, that bit. But the lower eyelid is quite prominent, and then we go down, and then a little bit less dominant, and then much less dominant. So that's just 3 examples that we can think about. And obviously, due to our reference, or you know, whoever we're doing, this is going to be different. But it's always good to think about that. I mean, if I'm going for this upper eye here, one thing I'm not going to be doing is making a really, really deep recess. Like on this eye here, we've got like quite a deep crease where the eyelid will fold behind the eyeball. Here, we don't see it. We've got a very, very flat area here. And even down to that corner of the eye, like this section here, that's not particularly dominant either. That's quite flat. Whereas this, you're going to have a lot more of that curve and a lot more of that recess. So quite also, the tear duct is very, very hooded in the corner there. Where this eye obviously is very, very prominent. And there's just 3 examples of basically the same thing again. It's always, I keep talking about like these fat deposits. It is good to know about these, just to know where you're going to have or why you're going to have these kind of like puffier areas or fattier areas. You have got protective fat underneath your eyes. Some people are far more prominent than others. Often in Western females, you'll see the under eyelid is a little bit more rounded. Like this. Because the fat deposit underneath is far more prominent. Whereas more kind of like Eastern female will have much more of a flatter kind of slope. Some particular strands of Western male will have this little like fatty deposit underneath the eye be quite prominent. But generally, again, all these are generalizations, but generally the under eye anatomy of a male is far less pronounced than the under eye anatomy of a female. But you'll often see contradictions to this if you just look at people, observe people. So this is what I'm thinking about. Not a whole lot of information. The thing that's the thing that's an issue with eyes is the shape, maintaining that shape. One big thing we must remember is the eye is a solid sphere. So as we put an eyelid around it, we need to make sure that the eyeball or the eyelids are kind of wrapping around it. One thing I don't want to do, if I'm looking from the top, I don't want to have my tear duct be at the front here and have my eye kind of like that. My eyelid is like a straight line. I want to make sure that my eyelid is wrapping around my eye. So from the side, I might very well not see my tear duct because it's actually behind my eyeball, like it's back here. So I'll have my eyelids come over the top and round. Just always remember this. Cool. Right then. So basic anatomy stuff. Just again, it's a great example just to look at people. Look at a reference online, obviously, but just have a look at people around you. Freak out your friends by staring at them. Right. So here's Clarence, and he's looking terrifying. Right. So if I actually want to start bringing in some eyeballs, it's very easy. Remember that every asset, every model, every mesh inside ZBrush should be referenced as a subtool, because that's essentially what it is, a subtool. So currently we've got one subtool, but I want to bring in a new subtool. This is very, very, very easy. I come down to where it says append or insert. It doesn't really matter which one you use. The difference is append will add the new subtool to the bottom of the list, where insert will insert it below your currently selected subtool. Really, at this stage, it doesn't really mean anything. This only really means anything when you're dealing with many, many, many subtools, which eventually we will do. So I'll just click append. I click append, we get this little menu up, we got a load of primitives, and I want a sphere 3D. There we go. Boom, so it comes in. But depending on how big your model is, it might be a bit too small, it might be a bit too big. So in my case, it's really big. Really, really big. So in this case, what I'm going to do is actually scale my model up. My old man, I'm going to scale that up instead. Right. So how I'm going to do that is just by pressing R or clicking up here to rotate. What we've got here is something called the Gizmo 3D, which is a universal translation tool. This has everything I need. It has scale, rotate, and translate. If I click this off, you'll have this. Now you're all lucky, because you don't have to use this anymore, but this is like an old-fashioned way of manipulating things in the world, and it's horrendous. You'll sometimes see people use this. Don't use it. Just use this. Gizmo 3D. And all I'm going to do, and it doesn't matter which one of these I pick, because they're all the same. Universal. So I go off in the middle there, where it's my little scaling widget in the middle, and I scale up. Make it nice and big. ZBrush has a interesting way of dealing with scale. Oftentimes you'll bring something in from ZBrush into Maya and it'll be tiny, because for some reason the general scale of ZBrush is really small compared to like Maya. Right, so there's my head. I'll leave it where it is. Select my school. Right, and all I've got to do now is move it into place, but I want to scale this. I want to use this to actually get my size, so I can guesstimate. That looks about right. So in the middle, I've kind of got my eye in there. Now I've left myself a little bit of a landmark in the head where I've got this little kind of crease going across the middle there. If anyone can see that. This is essentially where the middle of my eyeball is going to be. The eyeball itself it sits kind of in the middle of the eye socket, but it sits in the middle like a little bit lower. You've got a little bit more gap at the top of your eye socket than you do at the bottom. So I'm now just going to move that into place. On the right side, bring it in. I think I could probably scale it down a little bit more. Something like that. Something like that. Cool. Maybe lift it up a little bit. Yeah, there we go. So, I've got my eyeball in there, but obviously I've only got one eyeball in there. So how do I fix that? I hear you silently shout. What I'm going to do is go to geometry. So annoyingly jumping back and forth between these menus. And I'm going to go to modify topology, which is about halfway down. So I've got to geometry, modify topology. At the top of there, you've got mirror and weld. And if you look to the right of it, you kind of see these little icons. This is currently set to the x-axis, which is your side-to-side axis. If I click that, boom. What that does in the background is it basically mirrors and welds into the same subtool, the object. Now, in the old days, what we'd have to do is duplicate the eyeball, go down to deformation, and then go down to mirror. So deformation is here. Then mirror, flipped it over, then back up to your subtool, then merge, and it's a big old pain. But nowadays, just geometry, modify topology, mirror and weld. It's also a good example for if we accidentally make something asymmetrical. Oh yeah, it will flip from essentially our left, if we're looking at it, left to right. So in fact, yeah, if I kind of do this and right, so quickly flipping between subtools. If you hold Alt and click on the subtool that you want, you can flip in between them. So Alt and just clicking on them, you can see that in my subtools I'm flipping in between them. This is very cool. Okay, so that's bringing subtools in, and that works for everything. There's often points where I might bring in a cube for the nose. So I might bring in a cube and then form like a very, very basic cubey nose, and then actually start sculpting the nose as it kind of floats on the face. And then when I'm happy with it, I'll Dynamesh I'll merge the two subtools in together and then Dynamesh them in. so that so that I've got a lot more control over this. In some of the Devo sculpts I do, you might actually see me do that with, like, you know, noses, ears, necks, anything that's like separate from the head. I just noticed his head is very asymmetrical. So we'll actually just, there you go. Symmetrical. Right, so I'm going to actually show you two ways of doing eyes. So I'll actually duplicate these eyes for a second. Okay. Duplicate. Technique one is a little bit more kind of harder. It's a little bit more kind of advanced with some of the techniques, but it's very controllable. What I'm going to do is make two pieces of geometry, one for the upper eyelid, one for the lower eyelid, and have those be separate, so I can bend them and sculpt them in without them actually being attached to the head. The second way is literally just smashing it out of the actual head that I've got. So, technique one. What I'm going to do is, using my lasso, my mask, not my lasso. I'm going to mask off the top half of the head of the eyeball, like that. So make sure I've got mask pen on, just because it's easier. And I'm just going to draw that mask on as like a square, like that. Right, and then what I'm going to do is, inside subtool, right at the bottom, I've got extract. And then I'm going to click extract. And what this is going to do, it's going to give me a preview. So that's how big my upper eyelid is going to be. So I can decide if that's too thick, too thin. Now the problem with this is if I move the camera, it disappears. Because it's not actually there, it's kind of giving me a preview. So I click extract, I'm like, maybe they're a bit too thick. So I can come in here, and in thickness, this is well annoying, in thickness I can nudge this down, but it's so, I'm not going to grab and move this around, I'm actually going to type the numbers in, because by default it's 0.02, which is particularly thin, so I'm going to go 0.01, and then extract. I feel those are a little bit nicer. So once I've done that, I'm going to untick double. Because what double does is it makes a interior gap as well. So the whole thing is going to be a little bit like doubly thick. So I'm just going to turn off double. Extract, okay, happy with that. And then I click accept at the bottom left, and that's going to give me my upper eyelids. Mask those. So now I've got a subtool which is just my upper eyelids. I go back to that original subtool and I'll go flip to mask my bottom half. I do it again. Like that. So now what I've got is, if I increase, there you go. So I've got my upper eyelids as a subtool, I've got my lower eyelids as a subtool, which is very, very cool. So all I'm doing there is, with my eyeballs, I'm masking off the top half, subtool, down to the bottom of subtool, extract, previewing it, seeing if they're thick enough or not thick enough, changing the thickness of either increasing or decreasing, depending on what I want. And then when I'm happy, clicking accept, and then that gives me a new subtool. And then doing the same thing for the bottom eyelid. Now, why this is kind of cool is if I bring back Clarence, and I'll grab my upper eyelids. No, Clarence. And I'll bring that universal scaling tool back. Obviously, it's down here, which is not an ideal thing. If I hold Alt, again, Alt is such a useful key. You'll see that little padlock unlocks. What that is doing is that's like when we hold D in Maya and it releases the pivot point. Same jazz, just with holding Alt. So with Alt, I can just move that up and get it as close to the center of this as possible. Now what I'm going to do as a little trick for this is, because I've got this white circle around this, what I'm going to do is try and just get that to be the exact same size and in the exact same position. So like that. Just so that it's actually in the middle. And then let's rotate. Kind of see it come together. That's a rubber eyelid. And then I do the same thing, grab the bottom, move that into place, shove it up. So if I bring my eyeballs now, I've got the beginning of eyeballs. And now it's just a case of using the move tool. So what I want to do at first is get that dominant, subdominant shape of the outside of the eyes, and then I want to get the general shape of eyes in general. BMV. There we go. And yeah, just use, again, not being too precious. Oh, there's an issue. What is the issue that I've just done and I didn't think about it?
Is it blending into the eye?
No.
It's not mirrored.
It's not mirrored. Every new subtool you make does not come pre-mirrored. So remember, press X. X is your symmetry tool. There we go, because I'm looking for that little red dot on the opposite side. Now if I do that and I end up working on it for ages, I can mirror it over using mirror and weld anyway. But just to not make an absolute mess of it. So flip the other one. Now from here, and again in these live videos you might see me do this with some stuff, is I will just start to, there you go. Okay, so I'm going to start building this out, but one thing's happening, and something we have to be aware of inside 3D, or inside ZBrush. Your brush isn't a 2D brush, it's a 3D brush, which means anything on the inside there will also be affected, which is an issue. Because if I'm working on this and we're still at a relatively low level, if I dynamesh this, if I brought the inside and the outside close together, they'll merge together and create what I call Swiss cheese. And you'll see quite a lot where you'll kind of get, it was on the side then, like this kind of stuff here happening. And it gets a real, it's fixable, absolutely fixable, it's just a bit of a pain in the ass. So, to stop that happening, I'm going to go up to brush, and then I'm going to come down to auto masking, and then I'm going to turn on back face masking. It's about a third of the way down. There you go. So what this does, essentially looks, if anything is outside of a certain angle, it won't affect those polygons. So anything on the opposite side will not be affected. It's going to be really useful when you're doing very, very thin stuff like eyeballs, or eyelids, lips, ears, anything like that. So generally I put this on everything. Oh well, I put this on all the time. On my own UI, I've got like a little back face masking button that I can just make sure it's clicked on. Now this shouldn't be turned on for everything. I generally only use this for the clay build-up and sometimes the dam standard. It cannot be on the move brush. It completely messes up how the move brush works. It is also brush dependent. So if I go to another brush, it's not turned on the blob brush, for instance. So it's only on the brush that I turn it on. So now, yeah, there we go. So now it's acting properly. And what I do here is just start to sculpt out that information. You know, depending on my reference. I'll try not to affect the actual crease, the lid, whatever this bit is, let's call it. But I'm thinking more about the shape it's making on the face as it kind of blends in. For upper eyelid as well. So now when I'm doing this upper eyelid, I'm also thinking about those masses we were talking about. I'm not going to make this fatty deposit here, this red section, with the eyelid. I'm only going to be really thinking about the purple bit. I'm going to make this bit from our head. Because what I can do there is flick to my main body and then just start to sculpt it out. Getting too close, there we go. Always remember to start, because even though we're adding a little bit of detail now, don't get too close. This goddamn symmetry. No, okay. So I've got to mirror the head, because the symmetry is on the wrong side. Deformation, mirror. Then mirrored world, there we go. So as you can see, makes a nice bit. And I'd work. And I'm just going to duplicate my head for now. And I'd work that through. And eventually, what I'm going to do is I think, all right, now it's time to blend these things together, actually turn into one solid mesh. Very, very easy to do. I'm going to get my 2-bit. Obviously, I'm not going to blend my eyeballs in there. I want those to be separate, floating things. But my eyelids, obviously, I want those to be part of the mesh. So I'm going to grab my eyeballs, or my eyelids, sorry, and I'm going to move them up. So everything is close. All the things I want to blend in together, together. And how I do that is by these little curvy return symbols here. Oh, you can press shift and move whatever. What I'm going to do is I'm going to merge this head here, my OBJ1. I might as well bring that one down actually. I'm going to push that up. There you go. So I've moved it down the list so it's actually just above my 2 eyelids. And I'm just going to merge down. Now again we get this message here saying this is a non-undoable function. Remember that each subtool has its own history. So if I blend these 2 things together, I'm basically eradicating a subtool. Click OK. So now that's together, and then I'll do it again. Okay, there we go. So now they're together, and I could still keep working on these. They are inside the same subtool, but I could still work on these. Another tool we can use is if I turn on the thing that you can see that we've got different colours. This is what is going to happen with separate subtools. Each subtool will have its own poly group. And there's a few tools that make this really, really nice to work with. So if I go to B, M for move, we'll see that BMT is move topological. Now what move topological is it will move polygroups. Because a normal move brush will just move the whole entire thing. Like this. But move topological will only move the subtool it's touching, which is very, very useful, especially when you start to blend these in together. So even at this stage, I can kind of affect this a little bit. Still nudge it around. And when I'm happy with that, there you go, ooh, ZBrush. I can come to Geometry, Dynamesh, and then Dynamesh it in. Actually, before I do that, you'll notice my resolution's really big because my object is really small. So I have a feeling I've got to just bring that down. Okay, yeah. So I've already done it. There we go. So let's get a bit closer to this. Dynamesh. Oh yeah, the mask on, that's why. There we go, boom. So you can see now there where you had these subtools separate, now they've been merged in. And that is now completely sculptable. So blend these in now. And you continue on by making. There we go. So that's one way of doing the eye. Obviously, we work in and start, refining that off. But that's one way of bringing the eyelids in. Take the sphere, insert a sphere, mask off the top, extract the upper eyelid, mask off the bottom, extract the lower eyelid, rotate and move them into place so they make sense. Then merge them in to the head or the subtool you want to be merging them into. Then re-Dynamesh, connect them all together, and then start sculpting. So pretty easy, a lot of steps, but it's relatively easy. Nice and controllable as well, because if I'm not going to be Dynameshing those eyelids or that nose or whatever in for a while, that still gives me a lot of control to shape and blend and move stuff around without having the fear of completely messing up the surrounding area. The other way of doing stuff is well old-fashioned. It's just about getting my eyes in there and sculpting the information in. Obviously, we're not dealing with extractions and all this kind of jazz. The problem here is controlling. It's very, very easy to misshape the eyes and kind of getting looking a little bit lumpy and stuff. So if you're sculpting the eyelids out like this, just make sure you're taking your time, you're looking at your reference. And also, one thing is, ZBrush sees this as an object. So as you can see, the little red dot isn't where I want it to be, it's up here. Because that's the closest geometry that it can see with this in place. So actually I can't sculpt any information where my eyeball is at the minute. But to fix that, I just click transparency. Now I can sculpt behind this. So, depending on what you want to do, I might want to start sculpting out my lower eyelid. Bring it forward. If you're anything like me, your initial sculpt of your eyelids are going to look really crap. But all I'm worrying about at first is just getting into shape before I make them look pretty. So that's what I'm looking for as well. Change the material. Is I'm looking for this kind of information where it looks a little bit lumpy. I want to control those shapes as well. I want to control any kind of like really nasty, uneven shapes. Upper eyelid. So if I'm doing like timed sketches or whatever, I probably wouldn't do the extraction method. I'd probably just do this method and spend a bit of time cleaning up, because I don't really want to be faffing around with the extraction stuff. The problem with that is I might spend a little bit more time fixing up where the eyelid folds into the back of the skull, where the fat deposit or whatever's going on at this point. Over here is what's happening there. So my resolution's really high, so I can bring it down a little bit. Still a bit too high. Still really high. You'll notice that my resolution is really big. This is something you'll probably end up kind of dealing with. The resolutions of your Dynamesh depend on the size of your mesh, and sometimes it doesn't really make sense on why it does what it does. Because I brought mine as a really small model, but my resolution had to be really high to get any kind of detail on there. Just prepare to deal with that. There you go, so I can turn that off now. So I've sketched them out, and then at this point I might use the mask brush to do a lot of work. And you would have seen that has anyone watched the live 1 hour head sculpt I did that I put on the VLE? Has anyone watched that? I know you have. There are points in that where I'm masking off sections of the eye or masking off sections of the head, because I don't want to deal with, say, this bit here. I only want to deal with the lower eyelid, so I might just mask this bit off and then deal with that lower eyelid section.
You still need to do the back face thing when you're doing it?
Not really at this point, no, because I've brought the information forward.
Yeah.
The back face masking, yes, I do, because depending on how I've sculpted this, I might have a cavity back here that if I accidentally start, I'll do it, and I'll kind of do it deliberately. Because currently my back of my eyelids is going to look like this. But if I bring this, oops. So if I do something like this, and then I turn off back face masking, if I do this, it should be pulling through. I think I am. Because essentially what you've got to think about is the size of that circle is a sphere. So is that sphere going to be interacting with what's on the opposite side of the geometry? Which I believe it is. Looking at some of this spiky information back there. Let's push that back, I can do it a little bit more. And what's going to happen is if I Dynamesh this, I might have, nope. That's actually going to be nice with this. Show me my mistake. There we go. You managed to like that. Oops. Where a hole, god damn it, where a hole has appeared. That's because those two sections of geometry were so close to each other that they've merged together. That's going to happen more for the lower resolution stuff. If you're sort of kind of a low resolution, the high resolution means the voxels or the mesh is still a bit too far away from each other. Right. There we go. Now I can also use a lovely tool, the Trim Dynamic, which I used last session, to flatten out some of these areas. Because again, I want to be thinking graphically at first. I want to be getting any harsh lines that I need in there. So I might use a Trim Dynamic to try and get a little bit of that. You know, if you look at Dan, you look at his left eye, you'll see that it's quite sharp and graphic. Kind of looking for that kind of information at first. Also, you might see me clicking on the outside of this box. The outside of this box is basically it's open area. So if I start trying to sculpt inside here, I'll be moving the camera around. So that's why I can get really close in and do Dynameshes and do movement and stuff, because I'm using the outside of this box. Whereas if I do it on the inside of the box, I'm in an active work area. There's my eyes. Now we'll kind of pull out the curtain a little bit. Eyes are where I sometimes spend the most amount of time, because eyes are one of my weaknesses. Even though I love eyes, eyes can sometimes flub me a little bit. I can get them looking good, but it takes me a lot longer. The same with lips. Lips can sometimes stump me, and I'll have to work with lips a lot longer. Whereas like stuff like noses, general shape, the ears, I can smash that out really fast. But then I hit a brick wall when it comes to eyes and mouths. I kind of I have to slow down a little bit. But even at this stage, you know, I can still swap and change stuff. Like My eyes, I think, are actually a little bit, the eyeballs themselves are a little bit too far forward, so I can just grab them, move them back. And then I can, you know, if I think, oh, you know what, the eyes are a bit too low in the head. Now that I've got these eyeballs in, it kind of, again, like when we bring in our ears, when we bring in our noses, it helps to explain the rest of the model. At this point, I think like, okay, then let's them up a little bit. And that means I have to move my eyes a little bit. A good little trick to getting a nice feeling for eyes is 2 tricks. One, it can sometimes look a little bit weird, but if you just push back, get the move tool, hold Alt and just push back, you get eyeballs or irises. It's like an old, you'll see that on old like sculpts where they have like a recess for the eyes. It's like that. But I think it looks really weird. So generally what I do is I mask off. A little bit like that. And that's just going to help me kind of get an idea about if everything's looking okay. Use that draw, change that draw to, oh, it's already set to 85, that's good. There you go. And, you know, I'd be working that for a little bit. Really paying attention to my reference. Really, if I'm doing this from just kind of off the top of my head, so for instance, if I'm doing an old person like this, I've got to be thinking about what's happening with, you know, the aging flesh, the aging subcutaneous fat, all that kind of jazz. I'm thinking about all that's going to be pulled down by gravity. So, you know, my lower eyelid section here might be pulled down a little bit more. It might accentuate a little more of the cheekbone around here. The upper, this bit, whatever it's called, might be a bit lower, might actually sit really prominently over the side of the head. It might be a super, whatever. Always got to be thinking about this. If my reference is a young person, or if I'm doing a young head, you know, I could be thinking about that. Loads of stuff to think about the eye, but generally, eyes are simple to make, hard to get the shape right. But again, that's why looking at people, really observing, using reference is incredibly important for eyes. It's important for everything. But yeah, that's the only 2 ways I'm going to be showing you. Again, there are a load of different ways you can do this. You know, if you look at different people making eyes, you might see them do different things. I see people use toruses. A torus is like a donut shape. See people use that because then you've kind of got a pre-made cavity on the inside. I see people make the eye lids kind of, but what they'll do is they'll boolean out. They'll bring eyeballs, duplicate, but then they'll boolean out the inside of the cavity, which seems really awkward to me because it's a whole like process to do it. But what that'll give them is essentially the eye slit and a cavity, so they can actually have like an eye lid, a proper eyelid shape. Loads of different ways. But that's how we are going to stop now.